Hi, I'm Norleen. I'm here to read my old fanfiction Xanna to show how poor my writing used to be. We can laugh at it and tear it apart. Hopefully everybody will find it fun. Content warning: poking fun at sexual assault, cisgender, boys, girls, teenagers, violence, stupid humor that was strongly inspired by anime, very poor writing, and storytelling. I'm gonna start by reading the blurb. Xanna was a young orphan halfling girl, abandoned at a young age, knew nothing of her past, was shunned by everyone for what she was, only wanting one thing: a friend. Who knew that when she finally found one in a nice orc, her whole world would change? Chapter 1. I'm half. As cliche as it sounds, Xanna was not a very average young girl. Not when you thought about it. She was half blood elf and half night elf. On top of that, she had no family or friends, no one at all that really cared for her. If you didn't think about that, then yes, she was a completely normal teenage girl. Sadly, that could not be ignored, for it was what made her, her. She was a level 23 rogue and looked like your average female blood elf teen, aside from being a very short 5'2" instead of the, at the very least, average 5'5". Her skin was young, soft, smooth, and looked like a darkish pink. Her hair a dark, almost black-looking brown, commonly worn in a pony. Looking upon her face, she was kind, caring, trustworthy, purely good-hearted, the kind of person that never wanted to harm anyone. Almost like as if she were a saint, though she was still not quite that. In accessories, she wore 2 ruby earrings and never took them off at all, not even when she went to sleep. Going back to genetics, her ears were also completely normal, tall and pointy, able to hear anything within a 15 to 20 feet radius. Yes, so she looked like your complete, absolutely average young teenage blood elf girl, aside from actually being nice, that is. Sadly though, she still was not, as much as she wished she could be, for there was something off about her, from being half night elf. Due to her birth defect, as most people called it, her eyes, which are normally a shade of green for blood elves, were a dark yellow, a more common eye color for male night elves. For this, she was picked on by the other blood elf children and adults back at the orphanage she grew up in, always saying she was a half-breed no one would ever want. She sometimes thought it was true. If that wasn't bad enough, she was also shunned by people that didn't bother to call her names. Sometimes she thought that was worse than not being acknowledged at all. Worse than that, she'd also been left for dead, even nearly murdered. Yes, there's a difference between the two, no matter how small. All of the constant comments would make her curious about her parents, curious if the other children and all of those adults were right about her. And so when she thought she was old enough, she asked the keeper about them, hoping to get a long and detailed story of how they were heroes that were too busy and didn't want their precious gift from above to get hurt. Sadly, this was still just a childish dream. Her answer was simple and plain, yet still saddening and heartbreaking. Her mother had died after giving birth to her, and her father, being the night elf of the two, did not want to raise her, especially alone, so he had brought her to the orphanage. Hearing this, Xanna wished she had never asked. It stayed in her mind for the longest while, though she was able to push it to the back of it most of the time, as she usually tried to do with all the mean comments the other children would say to her. She tried to turn everything bad that ever happened to her into a good thing. Perhaps it's best that I'm alone, so now other children won't have to be. Maybe it's best that my parents don't have me because I probably would have ruined all their dreams, and such things like that. But lying to oneself can only last so long. Eventually, all she ever wanted was someone that would hold her as she cried, someone to talk to, someone to play games with, someone that actually cared if she lived or died. When she had reached the age of 14, the age when the younglings were allowed to go out and start their own journey of questing and such, she was as happy as could be, for maybe questing would get her mind off things, maybe even a chance at making a new life for herself, meeting people, and making friends. Sadly, this was still a childish dream. Everyone she came across were just exactly like the children at the orphanage and all the adults that came looking to adopt. Some were actually worse, almost making the orphanage seem like a good home. And yet, she still refused to ever go back. So, thanks to her birth defect, she quested alone, figured things out on her own, relying on herself. Of course, as she explored, she would come across people that needed help or a questing buddy, so she offered a kind helping hand, being immediately turned down when they took a look at her eyes. She began to get tired of it and even bought a pair of sunglasses to hide her eyes and have a stronger chance of being accepted. Though, as most of her plans usually ended, it did not work, for when people weren't trying to take them off, it made it very difficult for her to quest, so there was no point in keeping them on all the time. With that plan being no good, she went back to her usual ways, offering help to anyone that needed it, moving on when turned down, trying hard to find just one friend. Technically, she did already have a friend, the voice in her mind, because we all talk to ourselves, right? Don't lie to me. She wasn't much of a friend, but talking with her helped to stay the small amount of sane she was at. Relatable? Her existence is a story for another time, or an explanation later on. For now, she was just a voice that nagged quite often in Xanna's mind. The voice of reason, she liked to describe herself as, since she would constantly nag Xanna and try to teach her of what was right and wrong, what was the wise choice, and what was the dumb one, since she was a voice in her her mind, Xanna would think of her as an inner self of a sort, inner Xanna. She called her Izzy for short. She found her annoying, ignoring her a lot, exploring in silence. Next scene. Xanna sighed, walked over to a nearby rock, and sat down on it. I'm so lonely right now, she thought, placing her elbows on her thighs to rest her head in her hands. She sighed again and shook her head to get rid of the sad thoughts and replace them with more happier ones. Maybe if I start questing again, I'll come across someone who needs a questing buddy, she thought, smiling a bit as she folded herself like usual. Or you'll come across someone who'll say, yeah, look at your eyes, then say, no, now buzz off, and ignore you completely like every single person you've come across since you started questing a year ago, Izzy said in her usual negative and irritated tone. Well, the 1000th or so time is the charm, isn't it? Izzy rolled her eyes, folding her arms over her chest, letting out a light huff. Whatever you have to tell yourself, she said in her usual monotone. You can't ever let me have anything, can you? Xanna asked, her voice in the black void known as her mind, giving her a blank stare like she normally did. Nope, her voice answered, giving Xanna that oh so wonderful smirk that she loved so much. You know I don't like you, right? She replied back. Of course I do. That's why I'm still here. Izzy laughed at Xanna's annoyance. Well, I'm not gonna be put down by your negativity. She hopped off the rock and dusted off her backside. I'm gonna find a questing buddy, she said determinedly, pointing her right index finger upwards, smiling widely. Taking a deep breath, she began to march down the road to her right. That's the way back to Crossroads, you idiot, Izzy pointed out. Xanna stopped walking immediately, somehow making a halting car sound. Quickly turned back around, pursing her lips in irritation and embarrassment. I knew that. Of course you did. Oh, shut up, the girl replied back, a little steam line lightly fuming off her head from irritation as she huffed and began to walk again. I was just making sure you knew. Izzy smirked to the girl as she became more and more agitated. Oh, shut it. It's not like you know everything, Xanna huffed. No, but I do remember where you came from and where you're headed from when you last checked your map. When was the last time I checked my map again? Xanna queried, a few question marks appearing above her head, thinking on it. About 3 weeks ago, Izzy answered rather nonchalantly, filing her nails from boredom. Xanna's jaw dropped to the ground of her mind. Quite humorously. 3 weeks? How the hell can you remember what my map looks like from 3 weeks ago? Unlike you, I actually try to remember every detail of such things like that because it could save our lives, Izzy emphasized, staring at her host with irritation. Hey, I pay attention to some things. Sometimes. Shut up, the body hostess replied with slight embarrassment, trying to ignore her voice and keep walking to wherever it was that she was headed. Is that what you were doing when you stumbled into the Underlight mines back in Ghostlands? Her voice retorted in her damned usual smart-ass tone, folding her arms over her chest as she smirked. I had quest there, was the reply she received. And you didn't know that until after you had to run away for your life, laughing at Xanna's irritation. I still need to look up on some brain surgery, she grumbled. You need to watch where the hell you're going. You're gonna trip and break your damn neck if you don't, Izzy nagged, throwing her arms out in front of her, addressing that she was about to trip over a pebble. You damned idiot! I am perfectly capable of arguing with you and walking at the same time. Jeez, for such a know-it-all, you still sure can be dumb. I mean, I've been doing this our whole lives, and you still, Xanna nagged, being interrupted by her voice with an orc. What? She said in reply, quirking a brow, then began to spin in a circle, quite unexpectedly. As Xanna had been absent-mindedly walking toward Camp Tarho, an ever-so-polite green blur had run right past her, causing her to spin around in a circle. When he had passed, she was standing awkwardly, and her hair was quite a mess. Quite. Wow. Quite. Yeah, that word just basically got used back to back, didn't it? Was all she was able to say before more purple blurs had also made their way past her, causing her to spin in a few more circles and nearly fall to the ground, her ponytail holder just barely in her hair. Did I just see an orc getting chased by like 4 raptors? Izzy face-palmed herself, muttering things silently. Just go follow him and die. Next scene. After fixing her hair quickly, Xanna had made her way after the orc, finding him cornered against a rock. Hey, I thought you said that he was the Tooth Fairy, was the first thing she yelled to Izzy, having been fooled into thinking the orc was the Tooth Fairy, the raptors a few of his minions, and they were on their way to kill Great Father Winter. Her voice could only facepalm herself and growl with irritation. I hate you, she muttered, sighing at how the important things were always a second thought to her host. With another sigh, she removed her face from her hand and looked back to the ditzy girl. girl. Go save him from the raptors just so you can get yourself killed? Right! Xanna exclaimed, pulling out her daggers, eyeing the raptors with determination. Quietly, she stealthed herself, moving around in what shadows she could. Sneaking up behind one of the raptors, she raised her dagger high, then brought it down with force, stabbing the creature deep in its back. Having been the weakest of the bunch, it screeched out in pain and fell over dead. Making herself notice with a gracious greeting, the raptors turned away from the orc they'd been after, stared at their dead companion, then glared at Xanna. He was like that when I got here? She told them sheepishly, slowly hiding her dagger behind her back, hoping the sweat drop on the side of her head remained to go unseen. The raptors stared blankly at her. Right. Not gonna work. Crap. The girl said, her eyes darting off in her right direction, ignoring the orc's eyebrow quirking up in question at her. Have I ever told you that you're an idiot? Izzy managed to throw in just before the raptors all took one step toward the girl. Xanna's eyes widened in horror as she stared at their feet, taking one step back away from them. If I haven't, then, she went on, completely ignoring Xanna as she bolted and began to run away from the angry raptors, which only made them angrier and chase after her, and leaving the dumbfounded young orc boy behind at his rock. You're an idiot! She yelled, jumping high off the black ground in Xanna's mind, steam coming out of her ears as a small form of release of her irritation toward the girl. That's a small form of irritation. What's a large form of irritation? Shut up and help me think of something, will ya? The voice, now back on the ground, sighed, placing her face in her hand and shaking it with annoyance. Idiot, she muttered under her breath. Izzy! Said voice straightened up and placed her left hand on her hip. First, stop running. In her mind, Xanna nodded to her voice of reason, and in reality, she immediately stopped running, though she was still prepared to do so again if she needed to. Okay, what now? She asked, her eyes widening a bit as she heard the raptors catching up to her in the background. Turn around, Izzy said, using her right pointer finger to make a spinning motion for the girl. Xanna's eyes then widened in horror at her, even more so than they were in reality. Are you crazy? Just do it! As far as I'm aware, I wrote that before the Shia LaBeouf thing. Xanna sighed, both in her mind and reality, then reluctantly did as Izzy had told her to do, ever so slowly turning herself around, coming face to face with the raptors just as they had caught up to her. And then they stood up straight. Now the irritatingly short girl came face to chest with the raptors, aggravating her so much that a small steam line or two came off the top of her head. Any more bright ideas? She asked, her voice sarcastically, her right eye now twitching a little bit from irritation. My eye used to do that whenever I was annoyed. I think sometimes it still happens. Yes, Izzy answered simply, nodding to her. Fight one of the raptors while the orc fights another, then both of you fight 2-on-1 with the third raptor. But the orc! The girl was pointing out the flaw in her voice's plan as she slowly backed away from the raptors. The damn things were surrounding her like paparazzi on an anorexic model getting caught eating chocolate. Or any form of food for that matter. Next scene. Xanna was now completely backed up against a rock. Just like the orc she had almost regrettably pulled the damn beast off of. Izzy, think of something. The orc is hiding behind that rock. Izzy had finished for her post, pointing at the rock the young green orc boy had been hiding behind after finally spotting him. He was just a little ways from where the pink elf girl was, peeking out his head, staring and watching the confrontation Xanna was having with his raptor friends. What? Was all Xanna could reply, carefully peeking around the raptors to her left. To her astonishment, she actually saw the orc, whom quickly tried to hide behind the rock again. How did you? She began to ask, not even thinking of why the orc hadn't come to her rescue yet, as she had to punch one of the raptors in its nose to keep it at bay, then kick away the other two. Ask questions later! Her voice shouted at her, if you had the attention span to remember that far. Just fight! She quickly added, her eyes darting off in a random direction. Right. Hey, Xanna said, catching on to Izzy's insult. Xanna inwardly put her hands on her hips, shooting Izzy a look. Fight, damn it! Was all she yelled to her, close to pulling out her hair as the raptors ever so slowly began to show their teeth. Fine. The idiot girl huffed in her mind, gripping both of her daggers tightly in reality, finally prepared to fight. The raptors growled, the one to her far right immediately trying to lash out at her. She made a slash at it with her dagger, only nicking it. After the first moves were made, the orc quickly ran in, taking the third raptor off of her to help ease the fight. Careful, you idiot! Izzy yelled as Xanna just barely caught herself stumbling to the ground, being hit hard in the kidney from one of the raptors. The girl let out a groan in pain from being hit in such a sensitive area, quickly getting back to her feet and continuing to fight on. It's not there. It's not there, she repeated to herself, one arm wrapped around herself as she pretended the pain wasn't there, something she'd do to help ease the pain she was in. Ugh, I hate raptors. Watch out! Izzy warned as the other raptor tried to pull the same trick. back. Gracefully, Xanna did a backflip away from the raptors, kicking one in the face as she did so. Ugh, I hate raptors! I hate them! As she was landing, one of the raptors had tried to take another bite out of her, missing and only just barely getting the very end of her ponytail, taking off 3 tiny strands of her hair. And this is what caused the girl to snap. As she finally landed, Xanna had made the halting car sound once again. The odd noise grabbing the attention of the raptors and the orc boy, causing them all to stop fighting. She then quickly threw up her hands and made the time out sign. Whoa! Time out! She shouted to all of them. After that, she looked down, horrified, when she saw the 3 tiny hairs of hers the raptor had taken off. Slowly, and a bit shakily, she knelt down, ever so delicately picking up each hair with her left hand, placing them in her right. She stared at the hairs in silence for a moment. Her eyes widened and mouth slightly open in shock and horror. Of course, she completely ignored the odd looks being given to her for this. Horror, shock, and horror. It's getting used so frequently. I think you should only repeat standout words like just a couple of times a chapter, maybe every other chapter. Basically, only once per chapter, I think. That's what I've been coming to learn in writing. I am still learning, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. After her moment of silence, Xanna closed her eyes tight, scowled deeply, and lowered her head a bit, crushing the hairs as she balled her hand up into a fist. She was about to lose it. Yes! Over her hair. And that's the sign for duck and cover, Izzy said, slapping on an army helmet as she quickly ran and dived behind a fort that had come from nowhere in Xanna's mind, making sure she was as well protected as she could be for the girl's meltdown. No one, the pink elf girl began grimly, slowly bringing her balled up hand with the hairs in it up to her chest. Misses, she continued, now bringing her hand up to the bottom of her chin. With the hair! She screamed, bringing her head back up, her eyes darting open and shooting a slight murderous glare to the raptor that had done the action. Not even a split second later, after screaming the rest of her statement, she was up in the air, quite a few feet off the ground, making everyone's eyes widen in absolute horror. Next scene, the small elf girl had dived down from her spot in the air and onto the poor unsuspecting raptor that had dared to mess with her hair. It was absolutely horrifying. So horrifying that even a full-grown man would scream and wet himself like a terrified little girl. The orc and other 2 raptors stood idly by, only watching in terror. Oh, terror instead of horror this time! Then the orc quickly killed the raptor he had been fighting without the other noticing, and went back to watching the horrid sight when done. It was awful. Most of the things Xanna had been doing to it were probably illegal in over 17 zones, and that's only in Kalimdor. Warning! I am about to attempt to do a teenage orc boy voice. Kinda feels sorry for the beast, the orc thought, having to comfortingly pat the other raptor on the back as it cried for its friend. There, have some juice, he said, pulling out a juice box from his bag and offering it to the raptor. A moment or 2 later, Xanna was done completely destroying the poor little raptor, leaving only one to kill. And said raptor was on the ground with the orc, having a drink. Xanna raised an eyebrow at them, panting a little bit from using almost all of her energy on the one raptor, catching their attention. Quickly, they both stood up, dusted themselves off, and glared at each other. Idiots, was all Izzy had to say to the situation as she facepalmed herself yet again. Izzy's probably the best character so far. Xanna, as always, ignored her voice, walked over to the 2, then took a spot next to the orc, glaring at the raptor along with him, also trying not to blush being next to a boy, because that's how I acted as a teenager, because teenagers are stupid. The lone raptor stared pitifully at its dead companions, looked back at his doom, then made a small whimpering sound, its eyes getting teary. I already gave it a sex, why did I say its? May as well say his. His eyes getting teary. Don't be looking at me like I'm crazy. Shall we? The orc asked, raising his sword, giving a small smile to the girl that had saved his life. Xanna smiled back, giving him a cute tilt of her head. After you, she replied politely, addressing her right hand toward the raptor. Flirt much? Izzy teased the girl, smirking at her as she tried her hardest not to blush. Oh! Shut! She was yelling back to her in her mind, trailing off as she stared at the raptor before her in reality. The poor thing looked so alone and scared, something Xanna was all too familiar with. With a sigh, she grabbed the orc's shoulder before he had a chance to run up to it and begin attacking. Let's let this one go, she said, taking her hand back. Huh? The orc questioned, raising an eyebrow at her. But it tried to kill us both. Yeah, but look at it, Xanna said, addressing her hand at the raptor again for the orc to really look at it. It's scared, alone, and just watched all of its companions die. Let it go. This was before that cartoon and that song came out. Don't even. I'll admit that I like it, but that's a story for another time. The orc looked back to it, seeing how petrified it was, especially after seeing what Xanna was capable of. He sighed, putting his sword and shield away. You're right, he said, lowering his head a bit in shame as he nodded in agreement to the girl. After that, he turned to walk away, stopping when he noticed the girl was not with him. Turning back around, he saw that Xanna was carefully walking up to the raptor, petting it and softly speaking to it, saying that it was going to be all right and that it was free. The beast was thankful, after smacking her unconscious with its tail before running away. A little while later, the small elf girl woke up, groaning a bit from feeling some leftover pain of being smacked. Ugh. What happened? She asked, opening her eyes to find an orc in her face. Ever heard of personal space? Or... Izzy said sarcastically, knowing full well she was not heard, but still feeling the need to speak. Shut up! Xanna yelled to her, turning a brighter pink than she should be. All her voice did was laugh at her for it, frustrating her to no end as always. Are you okay? The orc asked, looking over her to make sure she was alright. He felt a need to remain in her face because he thought she was just so pretty, trying his hardest to not let that show through his actions, and failing rather horribly at it in Izzy's opinion. I'm fine, Xanna replied when she had been brought back to reality. Could you back away from my face now? She asked as politely as she could, trying to go back to her normal shade of pink, still ignoring Izzy's laughter. Oh, yeah, he said. Sorry, he added, quickly backing out of the girl's personal space, taking a seat on the ground. Next scene! As Xanna dusted off her arm, she looked to her left, looking at the orc, whom quickly darted his attention away from her to stare in a random direction. She ignored it completely, taking a moment to figure out what class he was to figure out how he got into the business of those raptors. With help from Izzy, she quickly noted he was a warrior. Mail armor, sword and shield, those whatnots pointed out. An odd helm covered his whole face except for his eyes, so they were the only thing of his facial features she was able to see. They're very nice red eyes, she thought, absent-mindedly staring at them. Flirt, Izzy coughed. Xanna rolled her eyes. Ignoring Izzy's laughter and now done with observing and making little notes of the orc, Xanna then took out her hairband and shook out her hair, trying to shake out what dust she could. As she did so, her voice began to laugh even harder for some reason. She continued on with ignoring her, shaking her hair a bit more. She heard from the orc, barely noticing him look away from her out of the side of her eye, completely oblivious that he was trying to hide that his green skin was changing into the color of hers. So, thanks for, helping me out. Xanna was amazed that she had actually been thanked. It'd been almost a forever since something like that had happened, though, unbeknownst to her, he had also thanked her to try and make a distraction because he didn't want her to see all of his blushes from how beautiful he thought she was. Get over myself. If you hadn't come along, I would have been Raptor Chow, he said, letting out a sheepish chuckle as he rubbed the back of his neck, also now turning back to look at her, seeing her put her hair back up. Seeing that, he quickly looked away again. Damn it, he thought irritably, seeming to have no control of his bashfulness around this girl. No problem, he heard her reply with a smile, her hair back in place. Xanna tilted her head slightly when the orc decided to turn completely around. She quickly shrugged it off and took advantage of the moment to inwardly thank her wonderfully genius and annoyingly evil voice of reason. Thanks for your help, Iz. If you hadn't known that the orc would follow, then, she was saying to her voice, smiling widely and almost blushing. I didn't, Izzy said nonchalantly, interrupting her. The young girl's smile quickly faded, being replaced by a slightly confused look, complete with a quirked brow. You didn't what? That's another one that's repeated. Quirked brow? No one's eyebrows is where they should be. No one's eyebrows are where they should be. They're all up here. This is where everyone's eyebrows are at. Up here. You know what? Shave these off. Just get a marker. Draw them on up here. I don't have a marker. I don't have a marker to draw the eyebrows on. But this is where the eyebrows are. All the quirking. All the quirking. All the quirking! I didn't know the orc would follow you. I just got lucky when I told you to stop running and turn around. Wait, then what was your plan for me if he hadn't followed? Didn't have one. I was just making it up as I went along. So you just winged it? Shut up and talk to the orc. He's starting to stare. Again. It's creeping me out, Izzy said, shuddering at the orc's stares. Fine, but we are not done talking," the girl shouted back, her hands and little fists at her sides, her nose scrunched up as she made her irritated pout to her voice. We're not done talking. Oh, yes we are," she muttered under her breath. "What was that?" "Nothing. Fine. Just shut up and talk to him," the voice said, shooing her off. Xanna mumbled a few things about Izzy as she went back to reality, stopping when she looked back to the orc, seeing that he was now facing her again, staring quite profusely. She ignored it, trying to think of something to say, only to come up empty-minded. So, as always, she said the first thing that did manage to be a thought. Your eyes are cool," she blurted out, receiving a quirked eyebrow from the orc. "Eyebrows are up here now. This is where they live." "Oh, wait, she stammered. "Idiot," was all Izzy had to say about it. "I'm you, Xanna," she blurted out again, her tongue twisting around her words. "Idiot. No, I'm Xanna. You?" The flustered girl was finally able to put together, smiling sheepishly as she stuck out her right hand for a handshake. "Maybe I should do the talking from now on," Izzy said in the background of Xanna's mind. Said stammering idiot ignored her, still too busy failing at her first impression. Again. "I'm Akazil," she heard the young orc boy chuckle, apparently finding this amusing. Next scene, Akazil could only smile at the girl, all flustered and, well, pretty damn adorable. "Nice name," she said, still sounding sheepish, but trying to slide it off as coolly as she could. "I could say the same for you," he replied, winking at her, laughing as her eyes slightly widened and her face slowly turned a bright shade of red. "Wow, can't believe that worked. Is this all I have to do to win women over? Just wink at them? Aw, yeah. You know you want this, ladies. Aw, yeah." "I knew it!" Izzy accused for the winking, pointing a finger at "Shut the hell up, damn you!" Xanna yelled, strangling her voice. She then sighed and let go of her voice when she heard Akazil laughing at, she assumed, her. "I failed at my first impression yet again," she thought, hanging her head down. "No kiddin', girl, I oughta," she growled to her voice, about to strangle her again when pulled back to reality by the orc. Home was still lightly chuckling at her, which only made her even more frustrated and want to keep strangling her voice. "Sorry, I was just messing with you," Akazil chuckled to the flustered girl. "Well, sorta," he finished in his mind. Izzy told Xanna again before she had the chance to speak to the orc, not liking him one bit, along with everyone else in all of Azeroth and Outlands. "If you don't shut the hell up right now, I swear I will mentally beat you with a bat!" the girl yelled to her voice. Izzy rolled her eyes and folded her arms over her chest. "I'd like to see you try," she said, staring down her body hostess. And so Xanna did as she said she would. She beat Izzy with a bat, completely forgetting and ignoring reality. And Akazil. Said orc had gone back to staring at her while she was inwardly having a moment. And in curiosity instead of love days this time. Oh my god, wow, because finally, in these past, oh my god, 2 minutes of them knowing each other, he's actually curious of what the fuck's going on with her instead of just swooning. Okay, I get it, she saved you from being eaten alive, but no. Why is she being so quiet? He thought, raising his eyebrow a bit at the girl. And why does it look like she's concentrating on something? He went on, slowly starting to go back to his love days. Well, that lasted about 30 seconds, maybe less. She looks so cute staring off into space like that, he thought, quickly catching himself as he began to grin. He didn't want to, but he shook all of his fluffy, mushy love days thoughts of the girl away, going back to wondering why she was being so quiet. Yeah, maybe wonder if she's okay, because she's just fucking sitting there, not fucking saying anything, just looking off into nowhere. Is she having a stroke? Maybe I should ask her if she's alright, he pondered to himself. Before doing so, he made sure to try and think if there was anything else he could do. When coming up with nothing, he slowly mustered up the courage to poke the quiet elf girl. "Are you okay?" Crap, forgot about him, Xanna thought when poked. She inwardly sighed, lowering her bat. "Ow!" A twitching Izzy groaned, sprawled out on the floor of the girl's mind. "I'll be back for you later," Xanna told her, tossing her bat aside as she narrowed her eyes a bit at the twitching voice. With that said, she inwardly took a deep breath to prepare herself to speak with Akazil again. And just when he had poked her a second time. "Are you okay?" he asked again, growing concerned for the girl. "Sorry," Xanna replied to him, smiling a bit sheepishly again. "I was just thinking of something," she said reassuringly, like beating my stupid annoying voice with a bat, she added in her mind, turning to check on said voice. She was unconscious. Maybe I was a little too hard on that last hit. Oh well. After that being said, Xanna then began to poke her unconscious voice with a stick, forgetting Akazil again. Are you serious? You talked to him for like 2 seconds and now you're just immediately... Whom went back to staring at her. The fuck you doing, Ak? He was thinking about how pretty she was as he stared at her. Prettier than all of the other blood elf girls he had seen. She had such beautiful brown hair, such a pretty smile, and gorgeous yellow eyes. She was just absolutely perfect. The kind of girl he'd be proud to take home to meet his parents. He thought this until he noticed the flaw. Wait a minute, the young orc boy thought, going back to Xanna's eyes, quirking a brow at them. Yellow? Why are they yellow? He only began his questioning because he remembered how all of the other blood elves he'd seen had some shade of green eyes. Hey, I just realized something, he said aloud, not being able to help his curiosity. Xanna quickly turned her head at the boy's voice, inwardly tossing aside her poking stick. What? She asked, turning herself to face him completely, tilting her head and smiling cutely at him as she had done a few moments ago. Final scene. You have yellow eyes. All the other blood elves I've seen had green eyes. Even the guys. Why? At this question, Xanna quickly darted her head away from his direction, fidgeting with her fingers a little bit, nervous and trying to think of how to tell him the answer. Well, she tried to start, her eyes still off in another direction, lowering her head a little into her shoulders. And there goes your questing buddy, the now conscious Izzy threw in, covered in bandages and bruises. The irritated girl then slowly pulled out the bat. The voice's eyes widened in horror at it. I'll be good, she said quickly, taking a couple steps away for safety. That's what I thought you said, Xanna said, lowering the bat, still keeping her eyes narrowed on Izzy. Well, what? She heard Akazil say, pulling her back to reality. He didn't mean to be nosy or anything. He was just curious. Head hopping! Well, Xanna said again, exhaling a bit, rubbing the back of her head as she slowly made eye contact with him again. Was all she managed to say before she looked away again. Half blood elf, half night elf. Really? Akazil asked, perking his head up a bit in interest. The halfling girl nodded, still not looking to him, trying to hold back a flinch. And here comes the horrible comment, she thought, thinking of almost everyone she had met in her life. Cool. Xanna sighed, quickly turning back to him. I knew you would say something like that, so I'll just wait, she said, her eyes slightly widening when she caught what he'd said. Did you just say cool? She asked, pointing to him, raising an eyebrow. Receiving a nod, shocked, her jaw dropped a little bit. She quickly shook her head and continued to press on with her questions. As in, you think it's cool and not freaky? And if we wanted to be questing buddies, you wouldn't mind knowing that or try to kill me in the most vicious and brutal way you can think of? Too far, sport. Too far. She heard Izzy say in the background, doing her best to ignore it. Well, it is a little freaky, but he paused. Wait, why would I try to kill you? Don't ask, Xanna muttered, darting her eyes away again. Please, Izzy added, also darting her eyes. Okay, the orc replied, quirking a brow, but not questioning, then quickly shaking his head. Anyways, he went on, it is freaky, but in a good way, and I wouldn't mind at all being questing buddies, he finished with a smile. Really? The halfling replied almost giddily, beaming at his nod. He doesn't mind because he only wants to... Izzy was throwing in, getting hit upside the head extremely hard with the bat. Ow! Son of a bitch! She wailed as she fell. Xanna ignored her cries of pain, wanting to talk with Akazil some more in peace, although she didn't know what to say from being filled with so much joy. She wasn't able to speak at all even, though she did cry, not even knowing she was doing so. Are you okay? The orc asked with concern. You're crying. Was it something I said? He frowned at the girl's nod. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you cry. It's fine, Xanna squeaked, wiping away her tears. I'm crying because I'm happy, and I'm happy because you're the first person to be nice to me in a very long time. Originally, that line was, you're the first person to be nice to me. As in, he was literally the first person to be nice ever, but this was immediately made contradicted when a new character entered the story. So I had to change that. Really? I figured that other people have said the same thing to you and you were probably getting annoyed with hearing it so much, he said with a smile. At this, Izzy stared at him like he was insane. Where the hell has he been the past 14 years? She questioned, her eyebrows slowly getting higher and higher. Now for that visual, I did visualize that her eyebrow was slowly just raising up and up. Like this part stayed on her face, but this part would just go slowly up. Ignoring her, Xanna smiled at him, very happy at his words. He smiled back, making her blush and turn away. You're such an idiot, her voice said in her usual nonchalant, solemn monotone. Am not, she retorted wittingly, what was left of her tears sliding down her cheeks. R2. Xanna just huffed at this and ignored her once again, going back to the kind orc. All of you must overcome your need to say D2 when Izzy says R2. Overcome it. Or don't, it's fine. Nope. This is the first time in a long time that I've heard somebody say something nice to me. She replied to his comment as she wiped away the rest of her tears. Not even your parents? He asked. Nope. Not even them, Xanna said plainly, standing up and dusting off her backside. Oh, I'm sorry. Oxel quickly tried to apologize, now feeling like a jackass. It's fine, she said, helping him to his feet, annoyed that he was at least a foot taller than her. Would you like to quest with me? He suddenly asked. Yes, she answered with a nod and a smile. He's only gonna... Izzy protested, being hit very hard again with the bat. And you see right there, it got shortened. That's why that's so abrupt. And after that, we are done reading the first chapter. So, oh, this was stupid. This entire first chapter only gets like a 0.1 star out of 5 stars because Izzy is entertaining. The rest of it is awful. It's just terrible. But I guess I could probably give it another 0.1%, so a 0.2%. None. Well, I mean, it's kind of staying true to the blurb. She's meeting a friend, but they're still don't know what's going on. What do you think is going to happen in this story based off of this chapter? Because I know what happens, so that's also part of why I want to give it a low rating. But just based off this one chapter, writing and grammar 0, plot 0 because I don't know where it's going, characters a 0.1 because Izzy's entertaining, but she's not entertaining enough to fix it. So overall, still just pretty much a 0 out of 5, just this one chapter because it's terrible. Whatever. Nevertheless, what did you like? What did you dislike? What are your predictions for the story just based off this one chapter? Please let me know in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe, whether it's because you like it or because you dislike it and you want to share it to make fun of it. I'm happy for all of it. I'm happy to talk to people. It's nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. May the peace be with you.